Are you looking for an athletic scholarship? You're in the right place. This is the Recruit Me Athletic Scholarship Podcast, the longest running podcast on recruiting and athletic scholarships. We're here to help your family navigate the recruiting road all the way to an athletic scholarship. He's a recruiting expert and a dad of 2 college athletes. He has a wealth of experience to share. Here's Recruit Me CEO, Brent Hanks.
Welcome to episode 392 of the Athletic Scholarship Podcast. This week's episode is part 1 of a 2-part interview with a college athlete's father. Aaron Boutwell is the father of Molly. Molly is in her 2nd year at Indiana University and is on the women's rowing team. Aaron will introduce himself, his wife, and Molly to you, and then you will hear how Molly got to Indiana University and then on the rowing team. Aaron teaches us, you and me, about the sport of rowing, what Molly's role is or position is on the boat, and how she was recruited and how some of her teammates were recruited. Also in this first of 2 episodes, Aaron discusses some of Molly's training, her perks of being on a rowing team, and her travels for meets. I'll preview next week's episode at the end of this one. You'll find out Aaron and I met in college at the then Southwest Missouri State. I helped to bring Aaron in as a manager for the Bears men's basketball team. You'll also hear how being associated with a sport in college, even as managers, affected our lives professionally, and how we use that to influence our kids not only to choose a college, but to appreciate the opportunity sports gives a student athlete. Now let's get started with the interview with Aaron Boutwell. Aaron, welcome to the Athletic Scholarship Podcast, and tell us a little bit about your family and what each of you guys are doing.
Hey, thanks, Brent, for having me. My name's Aaron Boutwell. I live in St. Louis, Missouri. Been married to my wife, Vicki, for almost 25 years. Actually, be 25 years this year. So after school, after going to Missouri State University and interning at the Missouri Valley Conference, I got a job with Rawlings Sporting Goods. And the job with Rawlings was to go around in our 18-wheeler that had a couple of trailers on the back. One was a museum, and the other one was a workshop where we showed people how bats and baseballs were made. And we would drive around the country. I would do about 150 shows over the course of 220 days on the road every year. I did it for like 3 years. And the end of the first year, we would end our season at the World Series. And we were at the World Series in 1995. It was Cleveland versus Atlanta. We were up in Cleveland, and there was another marketing vehicle in town for a different event. But they decided to come down and do a little extra marketing because you don't know where the World Series is going to be until like the week before. There was a nice young lady in the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile. And so we introduced ourselves to each other and got a conversation going. If it wasn't for baseball, hot dogs, and the World Series in Cleveland, Molly wouldn't be rowing for Indiana University. So.
You, much like Lori and I, we met at the Missouri Valley basketball tournament, so our basketball backgrounds brought us together, and that's how we met. So good things come from sports, right?
Good things come from sports, and good things come from saying yes and getting out of your comfort zone and working to get that extra job, that internship, or making those extra calls to get that link from the Missouri Valley to Rawlings. Rawlings was a sponsor. And so to make those connections, it is like you said, it changes the course of your life.
Well, give us a little bit more of your background and then your wife, what she's doing now, and then we'll get into talking about your daughter Molly.
Yeah, so like I said, I worked for Rawlings there after the internship ended up working for them for about 8 years, and then I left for about a year to go to work at a sales promotion agency where that was really neat. While I was at Rawlings, I did a lot of marketing and product management. I was the baseball product manager for a little while. I did batting gloves, catcher's gear, helmets, you name it. I got a chance to put a stamp on developing the product and managing that product while I was there. I had an opportunity to leave and do some marketing and sales at an agency where I worked on some Nike business, some international truck, Gillette's World Cup activation, which was very cool and kind of expanded my experience in a lot of different areas. With international truck, it was putting together incentives for the dealer or for the sales reps at each one of the dealerships. So obviously the sports ones were Nike was introducing their new backpack line, and they wanted to get that all launched at each store across their different partners. After that, I returned back to Rawlings because they had taken the model that I was talking about as far as the road show and putting it into ballparks. And so I ended up managing 7 ballparks across the country where we had this baseball, where we would show how baseballs and bats are made, and then sell people laser engraved bats, and did that for a long time. And then moved on, worked for them for a little while, and then got a job with Stanley Black & Decker working on the DeWalt brand, and just did that for 9 years. And then I just left there a little over a year ago, and I worked for Ideal Electric. My wife, Vicki, when she came to town in St. Louis, while we were dating, got a job at Fleischman Hillard, which is their world headquarters for the public relations firm here. She worked her way up through there and then has gone through a couple of other positions, most recently at the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra, where she was the vice president of communications. And most recently, she's been doing some consulting. Our daughter, Molly, we live in Oakville, Missouri, when she went to Oakville High School. She came home in the very fall of her freshman year, and she said, I'm going to go try out for the field hockey team. We never really knew much about that. Or my closest affiliation to field hockey was my folks took us out to the 1984 Olympic Games in Los Angeles, and one of the tickets that we were able to procure back in the day, we actually saw Olympic field hockey. So that was my connection to it. And so she took it on, learned the sport as she was going along, worked really hard at it, and got all the way up to where spent a couple years, obviously the freshman team, and then a couple years on junior varsity, and then senior year on varsity.
And Missouri-wise, what size of school is Oakville?
Oakville's a big one. It's a class 5 or class 6, depending on, whether it's football or the other sports.
You said you knew about field hockey a little bit in high school, but she wasn't really pursuing a college sports experience when she went to Indiana University. So how'd she end up at Indiana University?
Yeah, it's one of those where, she played the sport. She started on varsity for her senior year, but knew that the next level where she wanted to go to school was probably not something that was in play. She had looked around at a couple of schools, obviously here in Missouri, and then my wife went to Indiana University, so we have a connection there. She really kind of fell for the place and realized that maybe there was something else over there as far as from a club standpoint to maybe play some field hockey or do something, because she really enjoyed the team experience, and that was really important to her. So she ends up enrolling over at Indiana, and one of the first emails that she gets was sent out to all females, female incoming freshmen, about the rowing team, and there was an opportunity to become a member of that team. And so she attended one of the couple of introductory sessions that they had to talk about it. They know when going in that there are a lot of girls out there that really don't know much about the sport, because it still is kind of an emerging sport, but there are a lot of opportunities with it. And so she attended, started the workouts, which were like at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. Her funny story about it was the first morning there was about 80 or 90 girls. The next morning there were about 50 or 60 girls. And then by the third or fourth morning of the pretty good workouts that the strength and conditioning coaches for Indiana were putting them through, they were kind of weeding them out pretty good. So
you guys were experts on rowing before she hit Indiana?
We were not. Like I said, it was really kind of a introductory email, kind of out of the blue, and so she went. Molly is about 5'5", 5'4". So it was one of those where when they talked to her, they realized that she was not going to be a rower, but more of a coxswain. In the rowing, there are 8-person boats and there's 4-person boats. On both of those boats, there is a coxswain, which they're being the coach, and they're also steering the boats. Most athletes that they end up getting from the general population or through recruits aren't necessarily rowers. There are a few rowing schools across the country that do high school. There are some clubs that do it in different cities. But for the most part, they're getting, basketball, track, soccer players. Those are their big ones. Volleyball as well. They're looking for folks that are 5'10" or above, usually when it comes to rowers. 6 foot is kind of the key height.
They like long athletic athletes so they can use their leverage. So about the only thing that I knew about rowing is you want to go fast and straight. So she tells them to go fast and she keeps them straight.
She tells them to go fast, and she tells them and she keeps the boat straight. The funny thing about the Coxons, we were talking about the sports that these girls come from. In the Coxon crew at Indiana, there's a former, Molly's former field hockey. There's a former gymnastics, a former golfer, former swimming, and then also a former women's ice hockey player. The idea behind team and the idea behind wanting to be a part of that is, and knowing the sacrifices that are involved, whether you are the coxswain or the rower, that you're going to go through that. But on the flip side, you get a lot of those benefits of what they loved being on a team in high school.
So you mentioned that they sent out an email to all the females at Indiana. Have you heard from her teammates whether they get into recruiting before they get into college, or are a majority of them contacted as they get into college and kind of recruited once they get in on campus?
It's a little bit of both. There are coaches in the rowing department that are actively recruiting. So is what they look for, and is what, if you look at any of the Big Ten rowing websites, there are questionnaires that are available on those websites to actually go in and talk a little bit about yourself as far as what you do, whether you're a volleyball or soccer player, a little bit of your stats and different things like that. And then they will start to actively kind of talk to you about the opportunities that are there in rowing. So they are actively recruiting people, but I'll be honest with you, from being over here in Missouri, where rowing is not really a prevalent sport, it is more of a back east or west coast sport. There are tons of opportunities for young women in this, specifically because of the Title IX, that they need to offer as many opportunities for women as they do men. And with men and having football and the 80 some odd folks that are over there, to get those numbers equalized up, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 young women on the Indiana rowing team.
And that's what I was going to ask, is how many members does a normal rowing team have? And you mentioned a 8-team boat and a 4-team boat. When they're in competition, how many boats are they usually allowed to have on the water? And then also, what levels are there? Is there a varsity, a reserve? Do they have a club? What are some of the levels?
Yeah, so when it first comes out, they have two different classifications. They call it novice, and then there's varsity. Novice is just that you are new to the sport. You have never necessarily rowed before in a collegiate competition. So that's most of every freshman that comes in. But if you're a junior or a sophomore that goes out for the rowing team, which you absolutely can, after you kind of maybe got yourself settled, then you would be a novice because you've never rowed before. But then the next year, now that you have actually classified yourself as you have a year's worth of experience, now you're on their varsity roster. And so there are a couple of boats. The other sport that I will kind of equate it to, that folks might remember a little bit more in the Olympics, is bobsledding. There's two-person bobsledding, four-person bobsledding. There's usually like a USA 1 and a USA 2. In rowing, it's very similar. There's usually a 8-person or a V8 1, and then a 8-person V8 2. And then there'll be a V4-1 and a V4-2. So there'll be a top boat, and then there'll be a secondary boat. And then there'll be a novice 8. They don't really do novice 4s. They want to get the girls kind of just understanding the concept and everything. So they'll usually run a novice 1 and a novice 2. For anybody who is a little more familiar or is kind of wondering a little bit, maybe you saw The Boys on the Boat, which I would highly recommend as a great movie to go see, from not only just from rowing, but just from a sport and understanding the connection that comes from being a part of a sculling team. There are sculling boats and there's sweep boats. And sculling boats is whenever you are rowing both oars on each side of the boat. Sweep boats, you only are rowing one side of the boat. So these are all sweep boats. So if you're in seat 1, you're rowing to the left, and if you're on seat 2, you're rowing to the right, and so on and so forth. So the competition is usually they'll run all of those, and as they're running the competitions, depending on the location, it'll be how many boats they'll run at one time. At the Big Ten championships at the end of the year, they'll run. There are 8 teams out of the a number of schools that are in the Big Ten that sponsor rowing, and so they'll run all 8 boats across, and it's a one-time final. So you start, and all 8 teams are there. You go 1 through 8 at the very end of the finish line. Things will obviously change with conference realignment, with the addition of 3 new rowing schools, which will be Washington, UCLA, and USC. And so they'll be going to more of a heat setup, a lot like the NCAAs. So at the NCAA championships, there'll be different heats of each of the eights and the fours as they go through the competitions, and then as times are posted, they get moved on to the end to the finals.
And is this Molly's second year as a rower?
It is. It's her second season, so she's moved up from novice to varsity, and now there's a little bit of I wouldn't necessarily say a bottleneck, but there's just more folks in the game now. She's still learning the sport, and she's doing great, but she also knows that they're very heavy in the upperclassmen this year, so it's an opportunity for her to learn more about getting closer together on her boats. Like when she was mentioning it as a novice, their idea is just that they keep them spread out a little bit so that they just kind of learn what's going on. When you're in varsity, you're in one of those 8 lanes, and you're really close to the boat next to you. So it's a lot like as you're learning to drive, learning where your wheels are, you're learning where your paddles are. The other interesting thing about it is once the girls are in the boat and they're getting ready to go off into the competition, the coach cannot do anything at that point. Coach Steve, who's the head coach for the Hoosiers, has a story. He was at a coaches meeting with the other IU coaches when Coach Tom Crean, the basketball coach, was there, and they were talking about things. And he said, "So Coach Crean's like, so you're telling me that as soon as your girls go off in the boat, you can't do anything?" And he's like, "Absolutely correct." That struck Coach Crean obviously quite different, because in basketball we all know that it's a constant coaching. Whereas once Coach Steve puts the boat in the water and sends it off, Molly, as a coxswain, is now the coach of the boat. She's the quarterback, you might call it. You've got different parts of the boat as far as what each one of those rowers is actually doing to actually move them all down the water. About 2,000 meters is the standard race length that they're going to go through on all of these races. You know, it's interesting for some of the girls and parents that we've gotten to know who have done high school rowing. They've kind of created high school rowing to be kind of almost a cookout party type situation. Collegiate rowing is not necessarily like that. It just doesn't have some of the same setups, except for probably the Big Tens and the NCAAs. It's more of more of a festival atmosphere. We're racing the clock. And the clock is even subjective, to be very honest with you, Brent, because if the wind is blowing or how things are going, if you post a certain time, if it's more wind, it's again relating to those track and field sports where wind aided or wind against you can help or hurt a performance during a day.
So what kind of training facilities do they have? A river, a lake? Do they have canals? And then also maybe some of the weightlifting and stuff like that. What does she get to do in that capacity?
Yeah, great question. So they actually have 2 locations. They actually have a full locker room workout facility at Assembly Hall. They will also utilize the weight room over at Memorial Stadium. So they do have some on-campus facilities. The big tool that they use for the girls is called an erg. It's basically a rowing machine that has pulls off a lot of different data that they can actually grab, and they have a big erg room at Assembly Hall, and that's where they'll do their on-campus workouts. About 20 minutes outside of Bloomington is a private lake called Lake Lemon. I mean, it has some access, and Indiana University's built a boathouse out there. They've got all of their boats and some erg machines out there to kind of do some warm-ups as well. So they actually have quite a few facilities. They get full access to the strength and conditioning staff at Indiana. Even as a coxswain, my daughter has stepped on pretty much every step of Memorial Stadium from bottom to top because they want to keep everybody in shape.
Travel-wise, she went from novice to varsity. What are some opportunities for travel, and do they have home meets?
They do have home meets. They have a big one at almost the end of the rowing season. It's called the Dale England Cup. Dale England was a big a booster of the Indiana rowing program, and so they named their cup that they have their event with for him. They're usually rowing every weekend or every other weekend somewhere in the Midwest or even back east. There is also the Big Ten Invitational, which is kind of interesting because not all the Big Ten teams go to it, and other teams do. and it's located in Sarasota, Florida. And so that's kind of an interesting one. They'll fly down to that one. They're going back this season up to New Jersey to do some rowing against some of the East Coast schools. They'll fly to that one, but they'll actually go and do some training. They did a training trip over the winter break. They went down to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. They took a bus down there and did a week's worth of training. For spring break, they'll bus out to Clemson, and they'll row at the Clemson boathouse for a week out there. And then they'll come back. When they come back from there, they go to a pretty big meet that's at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, right outside of Knoxville, and they'll row up against some really great competition there. We went to that one last year because they actually did some freshman novice rowing at that one. Molly was able to cox for a race, and it was really interesting. There was Notre Dame, Navy, Michigan State, Tennessee obviously was there, so really kind of Duke was there. It's a really interesting schedule, so they're always around. But they'll also go over and do just a weekend at Ohio State with 2 or 3 other teams as well.
So when they were in Alabama, were their times faster? Because were there gators in the water?
No gators that we know of, but it's just a really great opportunity for them to go around and see different parts of the country. As you know, I got to do when I was on the Rawlings truck. The great thing about intercollegiate sports is you get to go and see and visit other campuses and see other people.
So she's going to nicer places than Macomb, Illinois, and Valparaiso, Indiana.
Yeah, there's a couple of places that you and I hit back in the old managing days of Southwest Missouri, then Southwest Missouri State, now Missouri State, in the old Mid-Continent Conference.
Thank you to Aaron for all the information given in part 1 of this interview. Part 2, or next week's episode 393, will cover Molly's rowing training and her season. More on rowing scholarships and perks. Also, some of the other expenses associated with rowing. And you get to hear how proud Aaron is of Molly as she has taken advantage of an opportunity that was put in front of her as she takes on both the academic lessons and the athletic lessons at Indiana University. Please join me next week for part 2 of this interview. Catch the Athletic Scholarship Podcast on your favorite podcast app or on the recruit-me.com website. Take advantage of the free Recruit Me Power Pack and the Recruit Me monthly newsletter. Sign up today on the recruit-me.com website. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week.